Fuck off. Do you want to have sound to make changes to your No. Cancel. Well, where's my mute?
There's next to your video at the top there, to your right. Good morning, everyone. Before we start, can everybody hear me? I'm assuming. I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Do let me know if you can't at any stage during the proceedings. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the hearings element of the examination into the soundness of the North West Leicestershire Local Plan Partial Review. My name is Louise Gibbons. I am the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. You will no doubt have had contact at some stage with Carmel Edwards, the programme officer. Carmel is always your main point of contact. If you need to speak to her today or at any point during the proceedings, please email her. But before I go any further, I do want to say my huge thanks to Carmel and the team at North West Leicestershire for making this virtual event possible. We've had some teething problems on the way, but hopefully we've got through those enough so that we can have a fruitful set of hearings. Just to note that due to the nature of the virtual hearings, sometimes you may see me look at another screen, particularly if documentation is referred to during the proceedings. And I also may look down to take some notes, but please be aware that I will continue to pay attention to the discussion. I have a list of attendees who are participating today. Can all of you who are actually going to speak today, please turn on your cameras? And could everyone else who's just observing, please turn them off? Okay. Thank you. To start with, it will help me if I go through your names now, so I get used to the faces on the screen, and even if you change places, hopefully I'll recognise who you are. So for each of you in turn, when I go through the names, could you please confirm your name, how you would like to be addressed, and your organisation if that's relevant, and then mute your microphone again. I'll start with North West Leicestershire Council. I have Ian Nelson, Rob Thornhill and Hugh Richards. Is that correct? We'll start with Mr. Nelson first.
Yeah, so Ian Nelson, Planning Policy Team Manager at North West Leicestershire District Council. Mr. Thornhill is, yes, he is on the call now, as is Mr. Elston.
Okay, thank you.
Hugh
Did you
Richards,
say Mr. Elston?
Barrister instructed by North West Leicestershire District Council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richards. Sorry, did you say Mr. Elston as well, Mr. Nelson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Next, I'll turn to Leicester City Council. I have Ripple Gupta and Fabian de Costa, is that correct?
Yeah, Fabian de Costa, Planning Policy Team at Leicester City Council.
Thank you.
Ripple Gupta, Senior Planning Officer at Leicester City Council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hallam Land Management and others, representatives of? Is that Mr. Lees?
Yeah, it's Gary Lees from Pegasus Group. Yeah, Gary or Mr. Lees is fine, madam. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Davidson Developments.
Hello, my name is Chloe French. I'm representing Davidson's and I work for Bidwells.
Okay, thank you. We also have a number of observers as well who won't actually be taking part in the proceedings. Does anybody else intend to speak today? Okay. Okay, thank you. I have already circulated a guidance note. Oh, sorry, yes. Sorry, I did miss Home Builders Federation. Sue Green, sorry, Sue. You're right in the middle of my screen as well.
Yes, no problem. Yes, Sue Green from the Home Builders Federation, but I would only be participating in the first part, issue 1, questions 1A and 1 and 1A.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. I have already circulated a guidance note and also a virtual hearings guidance note with an updated version of that set out a number of administrative matters concerning the examination and hearings. I don't intend to go through these in detail, but in summary, I will lead the hearings, introduce each topic and ask specific questions of the participants. Although the hearings will be a structured discussion and responses should always be directed to me, I will allow a more informal approach than other local plan hearings you may have seen or participated in, particularly the virtual ones. For this examination, I do intend to allow participants to be visible at all times, except during breaks when you should turn your cameras and microphones off. And your microphone should only be turned on if you are speaking. If you leave your microphones on, sometimes background noise can get into the discussion. Please use the raise hand facility. Is everybody familiar with Teams? Have you all used that before? If you haven't, there is a small bar at the bottom of your screen with 3 dots, and just to the right of that is a raise hand. Please use that, but also please lower your hand when you have finished speaking. Otherwise, I will keep having to come back to you to check whether you've got anything else to say. I will give you all the opportunity to speak, but only one of you may do so at a time. Please keep responses brief and focused. I will ask the council for their comments on points raised and will also ask questions of them directly. I will end the discussion on any topic when I have enough information. Each session will be no longer than 1 hour and 30 minutes. We may have some very short breaks in the intervening periods as well, particularly where we need to change to another matter or question, if you need to get information out to refer to new topics. During the breaks, please stay logged on, but remember to turn your cameras and microphones off, as others may be able to see and hear you. So I will turn my microphone and camera off when we adjourn for a break first, and then everybody else can do so. But just be aware, I'm sure Carmel's already advised you that because of the way this Teams system works, I will be able to hear and see anything that goes on during the breaks. The event will be recorded. We're actually recording now, as I understand. Is that correct, Carmel? I think so. The recordings will be available on the council's website at a later date. It's not appropriate to show anything on the screen, and all material already produced should be on the examination website. New documentation should only be submitted following specific agreement by me to do so during the hearings. This should then be done through an email contact with Carmel. We will not be using the chat function in Teams. If you have any queries that are not related to today's event, please contact Carmel separately. So, as set out in the guidance note, the examination will be based on the local plan partial review public consultation document November 2019. To be sound, the local plan should be positively prepared, effective, justified and consistent with national policy. I need to consider whether it is sound, if not, why not, and what can be done to make it sound. In order for the Council to adopt the plan, I can only recommend main modifications if asked to do so by the Council. Main modifications comprise any changes to the policy or to the supporting text which have a significant bearing on the interpretation of the policy. I have set out subjects for consideration in my matters, issues and questions, and daily agendas have been circulated. Can I just check that everybody who's participating has a copy of today's agenda? Can you raise your hand if you don't? Yeah, okay, thank you. And I will be moving on to that shortly. I have, though, first, I have received a copy of the Council's opening. Mr. Nelson, would you like to read that out before we move on?
It's actually Mr. Elston who's going to read out that
Okay,
one.
Thank you, Mr. Elston. Would you like to go ahead and read that out for me now, please?
Of course. The adopted North West Leicestershire Local Plan document was adopted in November 2017 following the publication of the Examining Inspector's report, which, subject to main modifications, found it sound and legally compliant. Main modifications included, in summary, a commitment to an early review of the plan by Policy S1 on future housing and economic development needs to accommodate any unmet needs identified by agreement within the housing market area according to the future strategic growth plan, and to reconsider the adequacy of land supply for housing and employment. Those main modifications were necessary because at the time of the examination, for the reasons explained in the IR, the quantum of unmet housing and employment need in the HMA and FEMA, Leicester and Leicestershire, was not finalised, and the same applied to where such an unmet need would be met. Therefore, the Council proposed and the Inspector agreed to defer consideration of accommodating any unmet needs from other HMA authorities to an early review of the plan, depending on whether and to what extent this proved to be necessary. Policy S1 therefore included a commitment to work collaboratively with other authorities in the HMA to establish the scale and distribution of unmet need, and includes the following tailpiece. The District Council will commence a review of this local plan, defined as being publication of an invitation to make representations in accordance with Regulation 18 by the end of January 2018, or within 3 months of the adoption of this local plan, whichever is the plan review will be submitted for examination within 2 years from the commencement of the review. In the event that the review plan is not submitted within 2 years, then this local plan will be deemed to be out of date. No one seriously contends that the Council has failed to meet either milestone. We are now at the examination stage of the review. What some representatives complain about is the nature of the review and/or the terms proposed in the review are not sound. The Council proposes deleting the tailpiece altogether and adding a sentence to the previous paragraph in Policy S1, which commits to submitting a replacement local plan for independent examination within 18 months of it being agreed with the other HMA authorities that the redistribution of any unmet need is to be. The formula is proposed in these terms because the amount of unmet need from Leicester, although clarified, was not yet agreed at the time of submission, and nor was its redistribution. It was therefore not sensible to put forward a specific date for the submission of the review. It is still not finally agreed. It was necessary, however, to submit a review for examination, otherwise the adopted local plan would have been deemed to be out of date by virtue of the provisions of Policy S1 as adopted, with adverse and unsound consequences for development management in the district. The development management system is plan-led. This means that planning applications are determined in accordance with the development plan unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. The NPPF is one such material consideration. The 2019 version includes the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which includes, so far as decision making is concerned, approving development proposals that accord with an up-to-date development plan without delay, or where there are no relevant planning policies, or the policies which are most important for determining applications are out of date, granting permission unless. As far as paragraph 11, C and D are concerned, a plan or a most important plan policy that on its face is deemed to be out of date is likely to be determinative that the plan is not up to date and the policy is out of date. In effect, the tailpiece to adopt a Policy S1, if it was to remain in place, take away the planning judgment that a decision taker would otherwise apply in paragraph 11 of the NPPF. The adopted plan, submitted on the 4th of October 2016, was examined against policies in the 2012 edition of the NPPF. The equivalent policy was at paragraph 14. Since the plan was examined, the courts have confirmed that whether or not policies are up to date is a matter of planning judgment, unless the deemed provision in the NPPF apply. The inspector examining the now adopted local plan knew full well the consequences of the deemed provision in policy S1 he found sound. That is not surprising, given the evidence base at the time included that determination of the amount of unmet need was imminent. It was also sound to hold the council's feet to the fire when it came to agreeing that what fair share North West Leicestershire should provide for and submitting a local plan review to meet it. However, even the best laid plans can be derailed, as the council explains in the introductory text to the partial review document submitted. As one of the representatives accepts in its issue 2 statement, in hindsight, the wording of the final paragraph of policy S1 in the adopted North West Leicestershire local plan is perhaps unfortunate and unduly onerous. The proposed changes to policy S1 will not mean that in considering planning applications, a decision taker will inevitably conclude that all policies, or at least the most important policies relevant to the determination of the planning application, are up to date. That will still be a matter of planning judgment, applying the usual principles, but it will ensure that not all of them are deemed to be out of date. Planning applications will therefore be determined in the normal way. It has been suggested that a backstop date for the agreement of a statement of common ground ought to be inserted in the proposed wording for policy S1. This is not sound. The statement of common ground will be agreed when it's agreed. If there is unreasonable delay, it will be open to decision makers to take this into account in deciding whether, as a matter of planning judgment, certain policies in the plan should be regarded as being out of date. The council has not delayed in carrying out a substantive review of the adopted plan in parallel with this partial review. The substantive review of a replacement local plan has proceeded at pace. The replacement tailpiece is a sound approach in that context. If the council delays, then it will be open to a decision taker as a matter of planning judgment to consider that in the context of whether the most important policies are up to date. This opening statement sets the context for the remainder of the examination. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Elston. Yeah, there are a number of matters raised in that we will actually cover during the examination hearing, so I don't intend to ask any questions of that. Before we move on to the agenda, did anybody else have any questions about the proceedings and the way the examination will run procedurally? No. Okay, thank you. Right, I wanted to move on to issue 1 and questions 1 and 1A, but before I do, I just wanted to make everybody aware that yesterday I was provided with a number of documents in relation to the Leicester City Plan, and also a joint position statement. And I just wondered whether everybody was aware of those. They are on the examination website. Has everybody at least seen that there have been some new documents published for the examination? Okay, thank you. Mr. Nelson, it might be helpful to me and to others if you could just explain all of those that I'll come on to the statement of common ground in relation to the triggers in a moment, but if you could just explain the documentation that was produced yesterday.
Yes, thank you, Madam. Yeah, the Leicester City Local Plan, which you may have picked up from information that was in various people's statements, was due to go out to consultation around March, April of this year. But because of the impact of COVID-19, that was postponed, and the consultation on that plan started yesterday. And as part of the preparation for that plan, all of the Leicestershire authorities agreed that it would be useful to publish a joint statement on housing and employment to explain, what the current situation is. Leicester City have declared an unmet need in terms of housing. And so what that note does is sort of try to provide a bit more context, and so that was pulled together through the joint strategic planning manager, Rob Thornhill, who is part of the examination today. The housing trajectory was something that the District Council have submitted. It is based on a trajectory at Appendix 1, I believe it is, of the draft City of Leicester local plan that was published yesterday. It is slightly different in that the 4 rows at the bottom are ones which I have added to look at the issue of the cumulative supply versus cumulative requirement. And the reason for submitting that is that a number of representatives have stated that the unmet need is immediate and needs to be addressed now. What that trajectory shows is that actually, no, the need doesn't apply until the late 2020s. Now that situation may change because it is only a draft local plan, and I'm aware certainly that the City Council are still working on issues around housing need. So it is a statement as it stands at the moment, so that may well change.
Okay, thank you. I mean, given that these have only just been published, has everybody had a chance to look at? I mean, obviously the Leicester City Plan, in a way, doesn't directly affect the discussions here. It does have an indirect impact. But has everybody had a chance to look at the material in any detail? Yes, Mr. Lees, you've got your hand up. And then I'll come to the others.
Yeah, we've just had a chance to have a very brief look at it, but I don't think it significantly changes the position of where we're at, particularly in the context of the statement of common ground. And I think in terms of actually housing numbers and so on and so forth, that's probably something we'll address tomorrow. So I don't think it impacts on the agenda today adversely.
Okay, thank you. Sue Green.
Thank you, ma'am. I was aware of the documents, but I was actually on holiday yesterday, so I haven't had opportunity to study them in any detail. But I think, as Mr. Lees has just said, it perhaps impacts more on tomorrow's discussion than today's, and I will go through them this afternoon.
Thank you. Yes, those were my thoughts. Did Leicester City Council want to add anything to what Mr. Nelson said? I think it would just be helpful to understand the context a little bit and to know how long the consultation period lasts as well. Thank you. Mr. De Costa. Thank
you, Madam Inspector. No, it's just really, I mean, Ian's covered, Mr. Nelson's covered quite a bit of it. We've started consultation yesterday. As mentioned, it's only a Reg 18 draft plan at this stage. We're running for 12 weeks until December. And the only thing to mention, in addition to sort of the unmet housing need, which we declared, actually we declared it back in 2017, but quantified it as part of this plan. We've also got unmet employment need as well, and that and the housing forms part of our discussions on the statement of common ground that we're discussing within the HMA. Okay, thank you. And just to set some context, have there been any changes from the amount of unmet need that you identified earlier this year, both in relation to housing and employment requirements? No, the plan that we were due to go out in March is exactly the same plan that we're going out with at the moment. As mentioned, the only delay was down to COVID. The only changes or the only additions are some additional evidence that we're putting out in parallel with the draft plan. That's a local housing needs study, a water cycle study. So other than that, everything's the same as what we were intending to go out with in March. Okay, thank you. So just to clarify, that was around it was over 7,000 homes, wasn't it? And is it 23 hectares of employment land? That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, thank you. You can lower your hand now unless you've had anything else to say. Okay. Anybody else want to make any comments on that? I mean, yes, I agree. It's I think the issues raised, particularly in the joint position statement,
are probably more relevant for tomorrow's discussion. So we'll hold that till then. Okay, thank you. And just before we move on as well, I have a number of statements of common ground. So I just want to clarify how I intend to call each one. So I have a statement of common ground for the partial review, which was published in 2019 with the authorities solely in relation to the partial review. I intend to call that the partial review statement of common ground. That makes more sense. When we discuss the housing market area and with all the other authorities, I will refer to that as the wider statement of common ground. And then just recently sent to me by the council and other parties, some of whom are here. I've also got what I'm going to call the triggers statement of common ground. So that's a comparison of triggers. Just to be clear on the terminology, and correct me if I start to get them muddled up, but hopefully we should be okay on that. Is everybody clear with that? Okay, any final comments before we move on to the agenda itself? No? Okay. I don't anticipate that these proceedings will take that long today, but I will keep an eye on the clock, and if we need a break, say at 11 o'clock, we will do that. So the agenda for day one covers issue 1 and the relevant procedural and legal requirements, including the duty to cooperate. And the first question, in respect of the duty to cooperate, have the council engaged constructively, actively and on an ongoing basis in the preparation of the partial review? And question 1A, what are the key outcomes from cooperation with neighbouring authorities? I'd like to focus on this part of the agenda in relation to question 1, on whether constructive engagement has taken place. A number of parties have picked up on that as the main issue. I don't think that there has been any queries really in relation to whether the council have been active and been engaged in an ongoing basis. So I'd just like to focus on whether it's been constructive engagement. I will turn to the council first. Mr. Nelson, if you could explain why you consider that the engagement has been constructive that you've had with the neighbouring authorities.
Thank you, Madam. Obviously, we've set out a detailed response in the response to the question that you set earlier on this year. So I don't intend to go through that in any great detail. It's all there for everybody to see. I think the main thing to note is the words, constructive engagement. And what a number of representatives have focused on is the fact that to date, there is not an agreement amongst the Leicestershire authorities about how the unmet need, initially from housing, but more latterly from employment, is going to be redistributed amongst the local authorities. That doesn't mean that the engagement that has taken place by North West Leicestershire District Council, but also by all of the Leicestershire authorities, hasn't been constructive. We are working together to address those particular issues of redistribution. To some extent, the statement that we was submitted yesterday in connection with the Leicester City Local Plan that we just discussed provides more detail on that. And we are still working collaboratively. Things have moved on considerably in the intervening period since the original dates in May for the examination were put on hold due to COVID. We've engaged consultants to undertake a sustainability appraisal of alternatives, looking for both housing and employment. And Mr. Thornhill might be able to give you some more information about that later on if you require it. But that work is now moving forward at quite a pace. So the work is happening. We are engaging. We have done so since certainly even before the current local plan was adopted in the run up to that examination. It's just taken longer. I don't think there's any of us who took part in that examination, what, 3.5 years ago now, thought that it was likely that we'd end up where we are. But we are where we are, and we're still engaging on a constructive basis, and we will get there very shortly.
Thank you. Coming to Home Builders Federation, Sue, you were one of the parties that picked up on the issue of constructive engagement. Can you just explain why you think that the council haven't met that part of the duty to cooperate?
Yes, thank you, Ma'am. Yes, our issue really about the constructive engagement is that we feel that constructive engagement should really result in a positive outcome. And I suppose that we're feeling extremely frustrated with not only North West Leicestershire Council, but the Leicestershire councils in general, that they have been engaged in this process for in excess of 3 years. And there doesn't seem to be a great deal of sort of forward movement. The statements of common ground seem to be putting forward that they will continue to work together, but there's no sort of constructive outcome in the sense that we just still no wiser as to how they are going to redistribute the unmet need, which we've been aware of unmet need for, as I say, in excess of 3 years. So our issue really is that this engagement isn't constructive because we're not really coming to any conclusive outcome, and we don't feel that that is a sound basis for plan making.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Lees, I see you had your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. I think just before I go into seek to answer the question directly, just I guess a little bit of context. Firstly, it's just worth noting the reason for the review in policy S1. So the inspector, in examining the local plan, was quite clear of the need for the review. I'll just quote what the inspector said. Commitment to early review in the plan by policy S1 on future housing and economic development needs to accommodate any unmet needs identified by agreement within the housing market area according to the future strategic growth plan, and to reconsider the adequacy of land supply for housing and employment. So there's two sort of factors there that were the, if you like, the potential triggers for the review of policy S1. Neither of those really has occurred, and this is the problem that we're facing, and this is the problem that North West Leicestershire has faced, as Mr. Elston set out in his opening statement. And the problem with that is, what have we now got? So the objective from what the previous inspector and what the NPPF requires us is, to ensure the plan's positively prepared and to ensure that future housing needs are going to be met. The problem then, in terms of, as Ms. Green has just alluded to, with this delay, which has been going on for a substantial period of time. This was at the time of the last examination, of understanding that Leicester has an unmet need, but nobody knowing what it is. So it isn't possible for the plans to adequately have a housing figure that takes account of any unmet need. And this has been the problem for various authorities throughout Leicestershire for a few years now. But the problem that we have now with the position here is that obviously we've got a legal requirement under the duty to cooperate, section 33A of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act. We've got paragraph 27 of the NPPF, obviously requiring effective, constructive engagement. And what we've got in the statement of common ground, because the paragraph 27 of the NPPF says that to demonstrate effective and ongoing joint working, you should prepare and maintain one or more statements of common ground. So it's a statement of common ground that gives you the evidence of that constructive and effective ongoing engagement. And nobody's saying that there isn't ongoing engagement. It's very clear over the years that there is ongoing engagement between the authorities. But how, it's clearly the question we have today is how constructive and effective that engagement is. We've now got a statement of common ground of November 2019. So they've had plenty of time to update this in light of the understanding of where Leicester City's at with its plan. And obviously a big delay has been with Leicester City in progressing its local plan. But obviously it was earlier this year when we penned our submissions to the pre-submission. Leicester had obviously released its committee reports detailing its potential amount of unmet needs. So they have had some time over the course of this year to get that statement of common ground to a more progressive, constructive and effective state as to how it's going to address the unmet need. All we've got in the statement of common ground that I can see is section 5, which talks about the governance arrangements, members advisory group, the planning officers forum, the development plans forum. So they have these groups in place, which is fine. But then in terms of the key issues on strategic matters, what we have is a statement that says a redistribution of unmet housing need from Leicester City or any other authority will be agreed through the established joint working mechanism outlined at section 5 above. In terms of what the, if you like, what the practice guidance says you should expect really from a statement of common ground, and paragraph 20 under the plan making section says if all the information required is not available, authorities can use the statements to identify the outstanding matters which need to be addressed at the process of reaching the agreement, and if possible indicate when the statement is likely to be updated. So we've still got no understanding of precisely the process or a potential timetable, which I think is the most critical matter here. What is, Mr. Nelson just said, we're nearly there. Well, they've been saying that for 2 or 3 years, to be frank, and without any indication of a timetable, I don't believe that they've met the duty to cooperate in having a constructive and effective cooperation with their neighbouring partners. So that's my concern. And when you look at the proposed change to policy S1, without a timetable in the statement of common ground, there is no trigger at the moment for when that statement of common ground is going to be reached.
Yeah.
So that's ultimately my point.
Yeah, there is quite a bit of discussion that we will have in relation to the triggers, particularly tomorrow. That's going to be probably one of the main focus for discussion. I just wanted to check. So in effect, what you're suggesting is that the November 2019 statement of common ground could have been updated to reflect a more detailed position in terms of where we are now. Is that what you're suggesting, rather than because there's this statement of common ground, the partial review one, and the wider one? So are you indicating you think that there was some role for a more wider consideration in the partial review one? Is that my understanding correct?
Yeah, I guess there's 2 points. I think it would have been very helpful for the statement of common ground to have included a potential draft of the statement of common ground that's envisaged in policy S1. So, in terms of actually undertaking what that might look like, so we've got some understanding of what this statement of common ground might look like in terms of how it might deal with the unmet need and the redistribution of it, more detail about the process of how it's going to get there, and most importantly, a timetable of when they envisage that happening. So that's what I believe is absent. And it's the lack of that further information and clarification that leads to them failing that particular test, Madam, in my view.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thornhill, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, just very quickly, just to update on some of the points raised. Really, it seems to be presented that this process has been going on for many years. Clearly, as a group of authorities, and one of the key roles of my job is to deal with this unmet need issue for the HMA. It's quite simple that we can't redistribute an unmet need if we don't know what it is. So that's the reason why it's been going on for so long. We knew there was an unmet need 3.5 years ago, but we didn't know what it was. And when you think about it in the context of the HMA as a whole and Leicestershire as a whole, Leicester City is the most sustainable location in the housing market area. It's got obviously higher order retail, leisure, cultural facilities. It's absolutely critical, and brownfield land opportunities as well, which are more limited in the wider HMA. So it's absolutely critical that Leicester does its analysis, identifies its capacity that it can reasonably deliver, because otherwise we're going to end up redistributing unmet need to less sustainable locations in the districts. So it's absolutely critical for the sustainability of the HMA as a whole that Leicester's able to carry out that work. Now, I think we'd all agree that's taken longer than we would have liked. We got the initial indication towards the back end of 2019 through their committee papers, but the authorities, the evidence associated with that, the full package of evidence, including the new bits of evidence that Mr. De Costa spoke about earlier, were only published yesterday. It's absolutely right and proper that all the authorities have the opportunity to see that evidence and respond to it. So we're doing everything as quickly as we can. We've got everything lined up to progress, but obviously the process as it's unfolded has meant that we couldn't go any faster than we are now in terms of getting to the point of having Leicester's unmet need dealt with.
Okay, thank you. I will just come back to the kind of time frame. It might be helpful to Leicester to explain what the process has been for them, and clarify why it has taken so long. Chloe French, did you had your hand up? I'll come to you, Mr. Nelson, in a moment. You've got your microphone on off still.
Thank you, Madam. I just wanted to sort of add in here that I don't disagree with what's been said. I can understand that it's very difficult to get so many authorities working together and identifying the unmet need. But I think, as Gary said, that we really need to have that time frame there so that everybody can be working towards that same time frame and provide some clarity of what is going to be provided when. And we now know those Leicester numbers, and work needs to progress quickly on how that's going to be distributed throughout Leicestershire. Otherwise, all of the local plans are going to be in exactly the same position.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, I was just going to come back on a couple of points. I mean, some of the things I was actually going to say, Mr. Thornhill's covered anyway. But in terms of the issue of unmet need, yes, we've known for 3.5 years that there is an unmet need, but the problem was it wasn't quantified. You also have to see that in the context of we'd got a new HEDNA in place in the early part of 2017. But then along come the government with changes to how we identify housing requirements and the standard method and everything that goes with that. And that's all set out in particular in our topic paper around the uncertainties associated with that particular aspect. I'd also refer you to the topic paper that we submitted, LP12, and section 5 there does actually give quite a bit more information about the sort of process for agreeing the redistribution of unmet need and how it is intended to be undertaken. And finally, just in terms of Mr. Leeser's point about the planning practice guidance, and the part that he actually referred to it himself makes it clear that there may well be issues where it is not known what the sort of answer is, as it were. And therefore, as long as it's highlighted what those issues are, that's as much as you can do in a statement of common ground. And that's what the, make sure I get my terminology right, the partial review statement of common ground, that's what it does. It highlights there is an unmet need. It's going to be dealt with through the authorities working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to come back to that, so the section you referred to is the future planning of North West Leicestershire, is that right, in the topic paper? So that highlights,
yes, that's correct.
Yeah, highlights the role of the strategic planning group and the task and finish group, is that correct? Yeah,
and it's that task and finish group that Mr. Thornhill is now chairing and that has been working, you know, for some considerable time, but for a large part of it, or at least the early part of that, we were still very much in the dark. But you know, things have advanced quite significantly in the last few months.
Okay, I'll come back to the task and finish group in a moment. I think it'd be helpful to know what their role is and what work they've been doing in relation to unmet needs. So I'll come back to you in a moment, Mr. Thornhill. Mr. De Costa, you have your hand raised.
Thank you, Madam Inspector. Just a quick sort of response, really. I know we are where we are with the Leicester plan. Putting aside COVID, on the advice of PINS, we wanted to exhaust all our options in terms of where growth would go in the city. And, you know, we've done extensive work, evidence work to back this up. And that's now viewable as part of our consultation at Reg 18. And that includes our brownfield sites as well. We've done a lot of work on our brownfield sites, and this has taken a while. We accept that, but I think it hopefully gives some comfort and some sort of certainty in terms of our numbers, our supply numbers, and a way forward in terms of redistribution of our unmet need. It's unfortunate that it's taken a while. As I said, we couldn't help with COVID. We were due to go out in March, but we are now out to consultation, and we will continue to work constructively with other districts in HMA on the statement of common ground in relation to our unmet need on housing and employment. Okay, thank you. Mr. Lees, just before I move back to Mr. Thornhill.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. Just my final point, really, I guess, just coming back to what we should expect from a statement of common ground. Practice guidance is clear that you should set out the process for reaching agreement and, if possible, indicate when the statement is likely to be updated. A key issue in terms of process, if we are going to have a redistribution of Leicester's housing need, we don't know where we're going to get to with the new standard methodology, which might change all of this in due course. But going on the evidence that we've got in front of us at the moment, if we are looking at redistributing Leicester's unmet needs, and I fully accept what Mr. De Costa is saying, that, you know, clearly you need to try and look at maximising growth potential within the city. That's got to go through the process. It's got to be tested through their examination process. But if we are left with an unmet need, which is what this is all about, which is what we're potentially anticipating, have been anticipating, then there is still a need to have regard to the Environmental Assessment of Plans and Programmes regulations of 2004, and a sustainability appraisal is necessary. So you can't just have a debate that says, well, Northwest's going to have 1,000, Charnwood's going to have 1,000. You've got to go through a proper sustainability appraisal to understand the implications of the redistribution, consider it against reasonable alternatives, to understand you've got a sustainable approach as possible, as Mr. Thornhill alluded to earlier. So there's quite a bit of process to go through, which is absent from the statement of common ground or a potential timetable for it. And I would have expected the statement of common ground to have set out that process far more clearly and a potential timetable for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Thornhill, I just wanted to come back to you to see if you could help explain the role of the task and finish group and whereabouts you are in the process.
Yeah, of course. The role of the task and finish group really is to progress the sustainability appraisal associated with any statement of common ground. So we've been working on data collection, which is incredibly complex, as I'm sure you can imagine, across sort of 8 local authorities, collecting housing and employment data in a consistent way, so that we can give that data to AECOM, who we've appointed to carry out the sustainability appraisal. So that was happening initially pre-COVID, then obviously COVID hit and we had redeployment of planning officers all over the place, to be honest. So understandably that hit the buffers because there were other local authority priorities, if you like. But that's been reconvened now for the last couple of months. So the data collection's taken place. We're currently in the process of agreeing reasonable options with AECOM about the options to be tested for the redistribution of Leicester's unmet need, and then AECOM will carry out the sustainability appraisal. Well, starting in autumn, we're aiming to have it finished within this calendar year, the sustainability appraisal. So that will test reasonable options for the redistribution of Leicester's unmet need and provide the evidence that we need to underpin the statement of common ground, which will deal specifically with unmet housing and employment need from Leicester. So it will be quite a specific statement of common ground on those two particular issues.
Okay, thank you. And are all the authorities involved in that work then? Is there a link with every authority in the area?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the statement of common ground task and finish group has got a representative from all authorities in the area, including the county council as well, who aren't a local planning authority but are obviously subject to the duty as well. So all technical officers are represented on that group. It's absolutely imperative that that's the case, obviously, when you're dealing with an issue that affects all authorities.
Okay, so apart from the effect of COVID, the work has been undertaken for some time. When did you start with the task and finish group? The
task and finish group was first set up, I think it was around August last year, and that was before, obviously before Leicester. Well, we were expecting Leicester to be having a consultation possibly towards the end of the year at that point. So it was set up knowing that was coming, so that we could get everything in place to deal with it once the unmet need came out. Obviously, there was an issue with delays with Leicester, and obviously the consultation was only launched yesterday, which is entirely understandable given what's happened with COVID.
Thank you. You can lower your hands now, Mr. Thornhill. Thank you. Mr. Nelson, you wanted to add to that? You've got your microphone off still. The joys of virtual meetings.
Yeah, you do that at least once. Yeah, I was just going to refer you again to the topic paper LP12, excuse me, paragraph 5.3. It notes that it was in June 2019 that the Strategic Planning Group set up the Task and Finish Group. And then, as Mr. Thornhill's just said, it had been anticipated there would be a draft Leicester Local Plan in the autumn of 2019.
Okay, thank you. And could you just comment on whether you think that the partial review statement of common ground could have been updated to reflect, I suppose, the evolving position, because it was submitted in November 2019, wasn't it? So I just wondered whether I'd like you to comment on Mr. Lee's suggestion that there was possibly scope to update that.
It was prepared. The partial review statement of common ground was prepared in the autumn of last year and was agreed, I think it was the early part of November, at least at officer level. What we then had to do was go through individual sign off by all of the local authorities. And if you look at the statement of common ground, it has actually got the dates on which each authority agreed to that, and that ran from sort of November through till sort of February time. Obviously, the partial review was submitted on, I think it was the 18th of February, and at that point in time, the statement of common ground represented the best understanding of where we were at. So no, I don't think certainly at that point that we were any further forward in terms of having information about the likely sort of timescales, etc. I don't think it needs to go into a significant amount of detail about the process, as long as it's clear that there is a commitment, and the statement of common ground does set out that there is the member advisory group, there is strategic planning group. So there's enough information in there to know what the process is, at least in outline form, if not going, say, to the nth degree. Obviously, we are now nearly 12 months on from when that statement of common ground was first prepared. We're on a very different world in so many different ways. So yes, it could be updated now, but in terms of what we knew at that point in time, no, it reflected the best.
Okay, thank you. So, and in terms of the statement of common ground, I think we'll probably come on to this in a bit more detail tomorrow, but because the work on the sustainability appraisal is moving forward, does that give the potential for a clearer timetable for the statement of common ground itself? Would you agree, Mr. Thornhill? Does that then move things forward? And I don't know whether Lester wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, happy to move on that. I mean, in the statement, the wider statement of common ground, the wider one that was agreed, that was only submitted yesterday. We're aiming to get the statement of common ground completed in basically early 2021. The reason for that is we need the sustainability appraisal to be completed this calendar year, and then that will then form the key basis for the redistribution of the unmet need. In terms of the drafting of the statement of common ground itself, that's quite a simple task, because it will be quite a simple statement of common ground with a couple of tables in there that set the figures for each authority. It's the sustainability appraisal evidence that is what takes the time, and that's the key to it, really.
Okay, thank you. So the joint position statement relating to Leicester's housing and employment needs, is that a step in the direction of a statement of common ground as well? Will that help inform that?
Yes, it will. Yeah, it sets out the context and sets out that we're doing a sustainability appraisal and envisage completing the statement of common ground in early 2021. Okay,
and Mr. Nelson, you mentioned the member advisory group. Alongside the task and finish group, has the member advisory group continued to meet through, as far as possible, obviously with COVID-19? Have they continued to meet and be involved?
Yeah, it's my understanding. I don't personally get involved in the member advisory group, but I'm sure Mr. Thornhill will correct me if I'm wrong. But yes, they have still been meeting, albeit virtually, as has the strategic planning group, which is the basically the most senior planning officers from across the county.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that they have been meeting and will continue to meet.
Okay, thank you. We have, to some extent, covered the key outcomes from cooperation. We've covered the the partial review statement of common ground, and I suppose with the discussion on the task and finish group and the SA, we've also covered some of the other things. Did anybody want to add anything else in relation to the duty to cooperate or key outcomes? Nobody got any other points that they wish to raise? Okay. Did the council want to add anything at all in terms of this particular agenda item?
No, other than obviously, you know, as just said, things have moved on quite considerably, even since the original dates for the examination in May caused it, you know, because of COVID, caused it to be postponed. And certainly, say, the last 3-4 months, a lot of work has been accomplished to this date that we can now, or are actually passing information to AECOM to do the necessary assessment for the sustainability appraisal.
Okay, thank you. In that case, then we will take a 15-minute break now. I need a comfort break. Next, the topics will be relating to the sustainability appraisal and the statement of community involvement. Are some of you going to stay on for that? Okay. Miss Green, were you going to do that? You said you were only involved, wanting to be involved in the first bit, but did you want to sit in and listen to the other sessions? Okay. All right. In that case, we will take a break. We'll return at 11:15, and I will turn my microphone and camera off first. But if I could just remind everybody to do the same as well, because we will be able to hear and see you if you don't do that. Okay, so we'll return at 11:15. Thank you. Hello everybody, welcome back. For those who took part this morning, I'm happy if you put your cameras on again. Okay. So, moving on to question 2 under issue 1 in terms of the procedural requirements. This refers to the sustainability appraisal of the partial review and whether it's suitably comprehensive and sufficiently evaluated reasonable alternatives. None of the parties here have actually commented negatively upon the sustainability appraisal process, as far as I can understand. If you did want to say anything, though, in response to the council, then I will take comments as long as they're addressed through me. But I'll come to the council to explain the process in terms of the sustainability appraisal. What you took into account in the sustainability appraisal work for the partial review, and what alternatives were considered and why. So, Mr. Nelson, are you going to deal with that?
Yes, I can deal with that, madam. Again, I'll refer you to our statement in response to this particular question, which obviously goes into quite a bit of detail. And obviously the sustainability appraisal report itself. The sustainability appraisal was undertaken by our external consultants, Clearlead. They had originally been appointed to do the sustainability appraisal for what became the substantive review. But because of the issues that we've sort of been touching on earlier on about the delays to the identification of unmet need and what that might mean for the local plan and decision to go down the route of doing potentially doing a partial review, we asked them to do a revised sustainability appraisal, and that's the report that was submitted as LP/06A. In all, 5 alternative options were considered. Well, just to say that sustainability appraisal report went through all the normal sustainability appraisal processes of looking at plans, programs, projects, looking at all the various baseline indicators. You know, what are the sustainability issues affecting Northwest Leicestershire, and also doing a sustainability appraisal framework. And it was that framework that was then used to assess the 5 alternatives which were identified as reasonable alternatives, or at least initially, and they are set out at table 6.1 of the sustainability appraisal report. Ultimately, it was decided option 1 of doing nothing wasn't really a reasonable alternative, for the very simple fact it would have meant that the local plan became out of date, and obviously that's something that the district council could not countenance and isn't really in anybody's interest to do that. The other 4 options, which were options 2, 3, 4 and 5, were very, very similar, but the options basically provided more detail as you went through, such that option 5 then is the policy wording which we ended up with, having the most detail, giving the most certainty. As I say, the options were then assessed against the sustainability appraisal, and section 7 of the sustainability appraisal report goes into detail about that. And in particular, table 7.1 provides a very useful visual summary, shall we say, of the results of that. And you know what you can see from that is actually there's virtually nothing between what were options 2 to 5, the ones that were assessed. The only real difference was option 5, which was felt to be a bit more positive in terms of sustainability of SA3 from the SA framework, which was about helping create conditions for communities to thrive. So we believe that's been a thorough assessment. We don't believe there are any other reasonable alternatives.
Okay, so yeah, the option 5, just just shows a positive symbol, whereas the other three, in relation to SA3, the other three options just show a question mark. Why is that a question mark? Is it just in terms of the more detailed wording of option 5?
That's my understanding, certainly, yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lees, I see your hand is raised. Did you want to say something? Again, I understand nobody's come up with any negative comments in terms of the essay, but did you just want to add something?
Yeah, if I may, Madam, I was just wondering, okay, just the process of why we're here, really, in undertaking this very focused partial review, and the sustainability appraisal section 7.1 says that the do nothing option was considered not to be a reasonable alternative. And I guess from my point of view, I was just interesting to understand why the do nothing option was not considered to be a reasonable alternative. The policy S1 is very clear. The reference to the plan being reviewed is under policy S1, and it follows, if you like, the reason why it would be reviewed, which is regarding redistribution of development needs. Obviously, neither of those have happened, and this partial review is an attempt to try and remedy that. But my question, I guess, is, does it need remedying in a certain sense? And it was just why the SA thought that was not a reasonable alternative. Just because that policy there says the plan's out of date doesn't mean the plan's out of date, of course. I mean, the High Court, Peel Investments North Limited against Secretary of State, August 2019, Mr. Justice Dove gave quite a comprehensive decision on when policies are out of date and so forth, and clearly everything has to be looked at in the context of paragraph 213 of the framework, of whether it's out of date, and also you know, whether circumstances have changed and the passage of time means that the policy is actually out of date. And because we haven't had any detail of a redistribution of housing need, is that going to make that policy in the plan actually out of date? So it was just trying to understand, I guess, why that option wasn't really considered a reasonable alternative.
I will come to you, Mr. Richards, because I probably be useful to hear from you. Mr. Lees, you referred to a High Court decision. Can you just read that out to me slowly, or is it referred to in your?
It isn't referred to. No, it isn't referred to, Madam. It's Peel Investments North Limited.
Yeah.
Which is versus Secretary of State and Salford City Council. And it was August 2019, and it was Mr. Justice Dove who handed that down. It's a High Court case.
Okay, thank you. And well, I'll ask Mr. Richards. Can you come in with some assistance in terms of the High Court case, please?
Yes. Good morning, Madam. Mr. Lees is right. Mr. Justice Dove did look at the whole question of when policies are out of date, and he was very recently upheld within the last month in the Court of Appeal. We have a Court of Appeal judgment in Peel Investments saying substantially the same thing. But what that case was about was in the context of paragraph 11D of the framework. How do you decide when the most important policies for determining a planning application are out of date? And what the court said was, well, that's a matter of planning judgment, unless they are deemed to be out of date. And you will know that in the NPPF, housing policies, for example, are deemed to be out of date when there are difficulties over the 5-year supply or the housing delivery test, for example. But what the Court of Appeal and Mr. Justice Dove have said is that when there is not a deeming provision, then it's a matter of planning judgment. Now, what there is in policy S1 stands is a deeming provision. It's a deeming provision on the face of the plan, which therefore takes away any matter of or any issue of planning judgment. And what removing the tailpiece is intending to do is to put back that question of planning judgment. That's why it's not a reasonable alternative to leave it in. Now, it may be on an individual planning application that the housing policies, as a matter of planning judgment, are still regarded as being not up to date or out of date. But they will not be deemed to be out of date. The decision taker, the council committee, the council officers are exercising delegated powers, planning inspectors on appeal will apply their planning judgment in what we now regard as being the normal way. So the removal of the tailpiece doesn't necessarily make the council's job or task any easier. If housing policies are as a matter of as a matter of planning judgment out of date, they will still be out of date. It's just that they won't be deemed to be out of date.
So Mr. Richards, just coming back to you then. So would this have been the case when the plan was adopted? Has this judgment had some impact and bearing on whether it's deemed out of date or not?
I don't think so, because it was really addressing a different question. It was addressing the question in paragraph 11D. How do you identify whether or not a relevant policy or a most important policy is out of date? The difference is that, as I think and I'm sure we'll come back tomorrow, at the time the previous inspector examined the plan, all parties were saying, we know there's an unmet need because the then Hedner said there's an unmet need. And we are all confident that within 18 months, we will know what the distribution of the unmet need is to be.
Okay.
And therefore, the inspector adopted the tailpiece that he adopted. As we said in opening, in order to hold the council's feet to the fire. But of course, what the inspector didn't know was that as a result of the standard method, the Hedner database was not going to be the database that everybody used for local planning going forward. And what the inspector didn't know was that the MPP, that the government was going to introduce this new thing called the standard method that was going to throw that timetable that everybody agreed was a reasonable timetable out of kilter. And that's why, with the benefit of hindsight, I agree with Mr. Leese when he said in his hearing statement, in hindsight, the wording of the tailpiece in policy S1 is, quote, unfortunate. He's right about that. If the inspector was examining this plan, or any inspector, we say, examining this plan, as we will discuss tomorrow, needs to be very careful before a deeming provision is included in another plan. But we'll come back to that tomorrow. But I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Mr. Lees, did you just want to come back? See, your hand is up, and then I'll come to Mr. Nelson.
Yeah, thank you, Madam. I think we are slightly unfortunate position with the wording of policy S1 and how that final paragraph is worded. I agree. However, we're still going to be into planning judgment. We have no timetable for this statement of common ground being agreed. We have a commitment to the local plan to be submitted within 18 months of that. But once the statement of common ground has been agreed and there is a redistribution, and before the new local plan is adopted, you're, in terms of looking at the up-to-date evidence, there's a planning judgment to be made about the policies that are contained in the plan. So we're still in the realms of planning judgment, and if this policy were to stay as it is presently worded, at the moment, you know, the evidence is we have no redistribution. So in terms of understanding whether that is out of date, there's nothing that has come forward. Once the statement of common ground is signed and agreed, that's the trigger for that position to potentially change, which will be based on planning judgment until we have a new plan that takes account of the most up-to-date housing requirements for North West Leicestershire.
I think that there are some parties not here today who would probably want to be involved in a discussion about the out-of-date nature of that part of policy S1. Mr. Richards, you still got your hand up. Did you want to say anything else? No. Okay.
I've taken it down again.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Lees, could you lower your hand as well, please? Mr. Nelson, you might want to say some things, but I wanted to I suppose understand, taking away the planning judgment side of things and the discussion that we've just had, whether there are any kind of other implications that you considered in terms of discounting that do nothing option. There were a few references in your statement and topic paper, I think, so it would be helpful if you could cover those.
Yes, Madam, and that's what I was sort of trying to come back to. I suppose the original question that Mr. Lees posed: why wasn't it a reasonable alternative? For the very simple fact, really, that we are in a plan-led system, and the wording of policy S1 is absolutely clear. There can be no doubt that if we didn't submit that review by, as it happened, February 2020, then the plan's out of date. It means we have nothing upon which we can make informed planning decisions other than national policies. That is not in anybody's interest. It is not sustainable development. It can't be. And so that was the reason why it was considered to not be a reasonable alternative.
Okay, thank you. I think it would be helpful with some more parties who I think would be interested in the continuing this discussion. It would be helpful to me. Mr. Richards, are you available tomorrow as well?
Yes, and Thursday.
Okay, thank you. That's just in case any kind of any more legal aspects come up, and it might be helpful to repeat some of the points that you have raised, because I think it will probably come up again tomorrow.
Yes, I'll make sure I reread Peel Investments in the Court of Appeal tonight.
Thank you. Yes, and it may, if we continue to discuss it, it may be helpful for me to have those judgments as well in the library, as they've been referred to. Did you say that it had been to the Court of Appeal, so there was an additional judgment as well?
Yes, that's right. I can undertake to get those to the programme officer. If not this afternoon, then certainly overnight.
Yes, if you could please. Yes, thank you. I have no further questions on the sustainability appraisal. Mr. Nelson, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to say anything else?
Apologies.
That's all right. It takes a bit of getting used to all of this. Anybody else wanted to say anything before I move on? Thank you. Okay, just finally, under other matters, I just wanted to come to the statement of community involvement and consultation in the light of the pandemic. Mr. Nelson, you've just the council have just published a new statement of community involvement. Is that correct? And if so, could you tell me the reasons for doing that?
We have indeed, and we have submitted that to the examination library, I believe. It was done because of the impact of COVID-19. There are a number of provisions within the previous statement of community involvement that basically rely upon people being able to see hard copies of documents. The council offices are now open in a very, very limited way, but essentially it's much harder for people to be able to view documents as hard copies. The government published some guidance in the early part of the summer, which basically advised local authorities that they should look at reviewing and revising their statement of community involvement to deal with this particular issue. So that's what we've done, and it was taken to our cabinet in, I believe it was July. I can check on that. And it's an addendum that sets out how we, not just in terms of COVID, but actually it did raise some issues about, well, what happens if something else that nobody sort of foresaw happened. I don't know, loss of the council building for some reason. So it actually gives an opportunity to just think a little bit more about how we would make sure people have an opportunity to view hard copies, in particular, recognising that not everybody has access to the internet.
Okay, thank you. And you've made arrangements that people can contact by phone and other means of getting information should they need it.
Yes, yeah. And if it, say, a lot of it is around hard copies, and if people need that, we'll do whatever's necessary. We have also put up a notice board now outside the council offices where we can do things like put up notices. So, for example, we had to do that for this examination because we didn't previously have that facility. Everybody had to come into the building.
Are the offices still closed at the moment?
Yeah, it's limited. It's basically by appointment, but it's really only for urgent matters.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the notice board has been put up in place of what people might normally see in the reception or something like that for notice. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I actually looked when I came in this morning. The notice is still there for the examination.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, I've no further comments to raise. Does anybody have any matters to raise in terms of the statement of community involvement or anything else for today? I have no further questions for the council today. I anticipate that we will need the afternoon session for tomorrow. I think there's a lot more to get through. So if everybody can be prompt turning up, we will start again at 10 o'clock tomorrow. I'd like to thank you all for your contributions. I hope you found participating in a virtual hearing both interesting and hopefully helpful for you. So thank you for all your patience and for helping out, just being quiet and not chatting whilst logging on. So thank you very much, and thanks everybody for taking part. We'll resume tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Okay, thank you.
you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.